I mean, it's like, okay, good. Can you guys hear me? Is it? Super. All right, let's start. Let's do this. So yeah, I'm very glad to be back here, and what I wanted to do is to sort of draw a new line of thought through some of the things I talked about last time I was here, which was like by now 2 years ago. And this is because I'm really interested in repetition, and so how we repeat things and how we repeat ideas or not, and how cultural traditions repeat or not. And so this show, this exhibition right now, begins what I want to sort of initiate a long-term research project about different cultural relationships to nature and how they're related to different technologies. So how they're coded by different cultural systems. And so, like my main practice as an artist is drawing, but the process of drawing is really tied together with a process of research. And I've been thinking a lot about performance. And so this idea of performing research and performing as in doing the research and then performing as in showing the research. So this is an attempt to perform showing the research. And so what is nature? The thing is that we don't really technically know, but we have this language, we have this linguistic system that tells us what nature is. And so for us, the opposite of nature is technology. And the opposite of nature is the artificial, and the opposite of I is you. And I first want to talk about this global culture that we live in, that is organized around the concept of use value and money. And so what we do is we extract value out of nature and then we convert it into money. This is supposed to be louder, but you get the idea. So, money. The thing about money is that money tends to flow towards money and towards urban centers. So there's this one directional flow away from nature and towards more money. And money, of course, is a kind of a technology. And so the first cultural system that I'm researching is the one that seems the most obvious, the closest at hand, but is actually quite obscure. So it's this technological culture, this global culture that we all share, this technological culture of the machine that we live in. And this culture choreographs our external movements, but also, and I think this is even more important, it choreographs the movements of our minds. And the problem that we have with nature, I think, is a mental health issue, kind of a psychosomatic issue. So we tend to split the mind and the body, and so here you see the robot. And so it sort of represents the machine body, the laboring body, and then you see the guy with the console, and he's directing the machine. And so he, for me, represents the laboring mind. And so there's a split between mind and body, and we exercise and we think, but we rarely put the two together, except in specialized contexts. So I want to show you this extreme example of that split, and this is the man who I call the exerciser. And so he's hooked up to this bionic, it's called the Bionic Gym. So he's hooked up to a machine that sends electrical impulses to your muscles. So you're exercising, but you're not making any effort. So your mind is completely disconnected from your body. Yeah. Anyway, so apparently you can burn 1,000 calories sitting on your couch, but then also a heart attack. So for my first series for this project, this research project, I chose a form that was made out of this pressure to produce that is somehow exemplified in this figure of the exerciser. And so this is a representation of a bamboo. And this is bamboo SDBJB52560. And this is a drawing of bamboo SDBJB52560. So this is a series, and some of the drawings you see around you here is a series of drawings of artificial trees or artificial plants that are mass-produced in plastic, sometimes silk, to be sold on global markets, mainly online, and shipped to places where people want the presence of a plant but don't want to have to take care of it. So somebody designs this plant and then draws this plant, and there's even a specific, often they tell you how many leaves each plant has. So it's an artificial form that's based on a natural form, and then it's mass-produced by machines. And these artificial plants are mass-produced in factories, quite often in China. And this interests me for two reasons. One, because of course China has this amazing history of bamboo painting. But this history is very different. So their relation to the bamboo and the way that they draw it is very different from the way that I'm representing the bamboo, or this kind of drawing. And very different from this kind of relation, this kind of global relationship. And the second reason is my personal relationship to Chinese Taoist culture through the Taoist practices, and I'll come back to that later. But sorry, I'm trying to 20 minutes. It's a little bit rushed, but I'll come back to that. But first, I want to return to something, the idea of drawing, or what drawing is. So for me, drawing, and in general drawing, is very much about the relationship between mind and body. And I think of the desire to draw, and we don't know where it comes from, this urge or desire to draw very much is connected to the urge to dance. It's very similar. And now dance can be an expression of joy or pleasure or sexuality, or it can have a social dimension, but it can also be like the rocking back and forth in anxiety, or like the pacing of an animal in a cage. So there's this raw urge, which I then feed through images of research, and this raw urge, like life force or energy or consciousness, these immaterial things that are then channeled in general in our lives through matter or through forms. And now to come back to traditional Chinese culture, here you see the Taoist Liu performing the art of Bagua in Beijing in the 1980s. And Bagua is a movement practice. So it's this movement practice is connected to the trigrams of the I Ching. And it's a martial art, but it's also a form of meditation in motion. So it's a kind of a choreography that connects body and mind. And I just want to tell you like a personal anecdote about this, my personal relationship to this tradition, because I first encountered Bagua during a really difficult time in my life where I found myself unable to draw. And I really experienced this like a blocking of that life force, and I was just terrifying, didn't know what was happening. And I never met Liu, but I met one of his main students, this guy you see here called Bruce, who is an American that went to Beijing in the 1980s, and he was a martial artist, and he went to learn from Liu. And this is again about how a tradition gets passed on. So he had to be adopted as his son in order to inherit this tradition that has been kept secret quite often. Anyway, so I couldn't draw. I went to California for a 1-week retreat, and I learned Bagua from Bruce, and then this happened. All right, so I'm not going to torture you with all of them, but there's like a lot more. Anyway, you get the idea. The drawing impulse was reawakened. And for me, this experience was kind of a shock, because you learn how to walk in a circle, and there's certain arm movements and there's certain leg movements, and they teach you how to turn around. And it's nothing very athletic, at least the way that I learned it at the beginning. I'm not very good at it. But the experience was a shock, because what I was doing did not seem to correlate with the effects that it was having. And it was the first time that I got a very clear sense that there were other types of technologies that you can call internal technologies that work to restructure our internal world, and that had a very different relationship. It's all about relationship to nature and the body and the mind than we do. And what I want to do, so in general, the broad, grand scheme, big picture project, is that I want to put together these internal technologies with the external, like the most advanced external technologies that we're developing in global culture, such as machine vision and AI and robotics, and I'm very interested in blockchain on a theoretical level. And I want to put these two together as a kind of a thought experiment, or a performance of a thought experiment. So it's like a kind of a science fiction of a global futurism, and all these terms are problematic, so we need a new language, but something like that. But the science fiction is not about like projecting an imaginary future, but using the imagination to connect ideas that are present right now with us right now. And so this was like a kind of a sketch for a project I will do at some point. It's called Bagua for robots. And so, no, that was not done yet, not done yet. Or maybe 4. Sorry, guys. Anyway, so, okay. So this project that I began working with now, is that number 4? That is number 4, thank you. So, okay, so the yellow bamboo drawings are the first installment of this work, in which I want to enact or perform a different kind of a now out of the elements that are currently present. And I think these drawings, is despite the fact that the objects, the plastic trees, represent the kind of the worst of our global culture, because they'll end up as piles of plastic trash that are choking our earth and our ocean. For me, paradoxically, they also represent a kind of a hope. Because they show that we have this very intimate and deep and natural love for nature that I think is really coded in our very physicality. And from the figure of the exerciser also, I realized that our first relationship to nature is not the plant or the forest or even the food we eat, but is our own relationship to our own bodies. That's the main relationship to nature that we have. And this is an example, I don't know, this is again, this idea of morphology, that this is a neuron. So, the image of our brains are structured like plants. And this connects also to the next part, the next chapter of this project, that that our brains have these receptacles to plants also. The plants in a way communicate with us. And so I just want to say very quickly that there's a prequel to this, and this is an image of a rainforest that I found in anthropology archives in Switzerland. And I've been obsessively drawing this image over and over and over again, and this is the 5th or the 6th iteration here. And I think it's so interesting, because it's I feel like it's a very strange image, and I think it has a 3-part structure. So it's the light interacting with the forest, and a kind of example of an early example of machine vision. And in this case, the machine is just the camera, so it's the simple, relatively simple machine of the camera. But in this next chapter of this work, I want to work from images that are processed from the most advanced technologies of representation that we have right now, which is AI and machine vision, to make an imaginary panorama of the rainforest, the Amazon rainforest. So that's the drawing part. And the research part of this rainforest will connect to the internal technologies of the peoples of the Amazon, which have been systematically disregarded and destroyed and exploited. But the peoples of the Amazon are really on the forefront of conservation fights right now and have a very different view of the rainforest than we have in my imaginary rainforest that I have in my head. There's this romantic picture of the sublime, or this digitized chaos of current machine processes. And they say that we can communicate with nature directly. And as luck would have it, by complete accident and in a really unexpected location, this January I met Maima Maria Taquinas Pantera, who you see on the right here, and we plan to somehow collaborate, and we'll see how this next step will develop, because it's a lot of organization, and then it really will require a lot of technical issues and funding. And as I speak about funding, I just want to finish to talk about this image again, about money, because really it is about, in the end, about this image of money. Because the idea is to connect to a broader framework of people in different fields and different disciplines, to imagine like a real global culture with a different relationship to nature that is not one of appropriation or extraction or exploitation, but one of circulation. So, of course, how do we do it? I mean, easy to say, like, but how do we do it? And I think that, like, a lot of people are really interested in blockchain technology. And just to finish up, I just want to mention that, in fact, yes, there's that technology, but we also need to think about how we can restructure. Like, our minds are completely conditioned by this constant flow of culturally determined codes of language that constantly runs in our minds, and we can't stop it. It just runs, no matter what. And we can't stop it unless we learn techniques or technologies that allow us to do this. So in order to shift the relationships between I and you, what we talk about, what we think about, how our minds are occupied, the pressures that we have in our minds, we can connect to these technologies that are available right now. So I mentioned Taoist techniques and so-called shamanic practices, but this is a representation of a Tibetan technology of mine called Dzogchen. And I want to leave you with like something that's like cross-culturally available technology of headbanging. So this is another way to stop the culturally conditioned language for a little bit, at least. And we see it in light clubs, in mental hospitals, Sufi rituals. And here I'm going to show it to you demonstrated by the amazing Sufi duo, the Nuran sisters. And that's it. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, let's stretch.